الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم واجعلوا بيوتكم قبلة وأقيموا الصلاة سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspired Musa alayhi salam and his brother, both of whom were prophets, to go to their people and make this statement that I just recited before you, which is actually from an ayah of the Quran. وَاجْعَلُوا بُيُوتَكُمْ قِبْلَةً, make your homes a place of worship, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ, and establish the prayer. So we've been speaking about the home, and we spoke about various aspects of the home, for example, creating a home, actions that should occur between the individuals in the home. And now, today, what I'd like to speak on briefly and mention some hadith concerning the matter is what should be done in the home. So there are some acts that we should definitely be doing in our homes. There are some acts we definitely should not be doing in our homes. So inshallah, this week we'll talk about the acts that should be done in the home. And the basis of the principle is this ayah. So here, Musa alayhi salam was told to tell his people, وَاجْعَلُوا بُيُوتَكُمْ قِبْلَةً, make your homes a place of worship. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ, and establish the prayer. Meaning, establish the prayer within your homes. So there are many, now this applies in particular to the Bani Israel. And the ulama say that this ayah actually applies to the fact that the Bani Israel were being tested by Fir'aun. They were undergoing severe hardship. So as a result, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala assigned them prayer in their homes so that they could develop the strength and resolve to withstand those difficulties. In another ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Bani Israel, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ, and seek assistance with patience and prayer. And actually the ulama say that this ayah means seek assistance against the trials and tribulations of Fir'aun with patience and prayer. And then this is more particular in that it says that that prayer should occur within the house. Now remember the general principle that if you've been coming to the tafsir, we mention regularly in the tafsir, otherwise you should know it. And that is that when something is assigned to the Bani Israel, it's a particular assignment to them. But if the Prophet ﷺ carries it over into our ummah, then it becomes an assignment for us as well. So there were some acts that were particular to those previous communities. The Prophet ﷺ did not bring them into his sharia. There were other acts that the Prophet ﷺ brought into his sharia, and then sometimes adapted or sometimes kept the way they were. For example, when the Prophet ﷺ arrived in Medina, he found the Jews of Medina fasting on the 10th of Muharram. So when he approached them and asked them why they were fasting on the 10th of Muharram, they said this was the day that we were saved from Fir'aun. This was the day that Musa alayhi salam was saved from Fir'aun. So the Prophet ﷺ said, Musa alayhi salam is more to us than he is to you. And then he brought that habit of fasting into our sharia as well. So much so that the ulama say that that actually became a mandatory fast, according to some of our scholars. There's a debate, but some believe that that was a mandatory fast. So here you have an example of an act existing in a previous sharia, and then the Prophet ﷺ bringing it into our sharia. Now if he didn't bring it with those words, you could not transfer it. Because with the coming of each new messenger, there are particular messengers who receive their own sharia, and the Prophet ﷺ was one of them. So once he comes, the previous sharia has become null and void. So anyway, in this particular ayah, although it is directly addressed to the Bani Israel, there are some general principles that the Prophet ﷺ brought over into our community as well. The first is to pray in one's home. Now, when you speak about prayer in the home, then it depends on who you're speaking about. Right? So either you're a male or you're a female. In the case of the males, the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith in the book of Imam Bukhari that the best prayer, the very best prayer that a person can pray is the one prayed in the home. So here a general principle is established. Except the fara'id. And then the Prophet ﷺ actually makes it except the fara'id. So every other prayer that an individual prays, the best place to pray that prayer is at home. Except the fara'id. Meaning the Prophet's general point is that actually the prayer should be at home. And then the exception is the fara'id. So now look at the way the statement is made. Now, that includes the sunan, that includes the nawafil, and that includes any other supererogatory prayer that a person decides to pray based on need. Right? So for example, salatul haja, etc. The main reason for this is one, because it's the sunnah. So once something is a sunnah, we don't need to have a reason for it. The Prophet ﷺ did it this way, so we do it that way. We follow footstep by footstep. But the other reason is that it decreases the pride associated with praying. You know, what can happen is that you start praying and then people see you and then they congratulate you, or you start praying what you wouldn't normally pray at home because you know people are watching you, so you feel good about yourself because other people are watching you. All of these things become interferences within worship. So the best place to pray is in the home. Now in this day and age you find that most people pray their sunnah mu'akkada. Sunnah mu'akkada means those sunnahs that are heavily emphasized. Most people pray those sunnah mu'akkada in the masjid. And the ulama actually encourage people to do so. And the reason is because once we get home, shaitan has a field day with us. And most likely, if you didn't pray it in the masjid when you got home, you wouldn't pray it. So in order to preserve those mu'akkadat, the ulama have assigned that people pray the mu'akkadat at home, in the masjid, and then pray everything else at home. So again, the general principle is that the farad should be prayed in the masjid, and that the sunan should be prayed at home, the nawafil should be prayed at home, the witr should be prayed at home. If you are an individual who knows that you can go home and complete your prayer at home, it's better for you to pray at home. If you know that when you go home, you will complete your prayer at home, it's better to pray at home. If you have a doubt, you know that every time you don't pray witr, you go home and you go to sleep and you miss witr, then you shouldn't be playing games with the salah, you should pray it in the masjid before you leave. Alright? But the general principle is that the highest reward is at home. That's for a male. For a woman, it's opposite. In a couple ways. Number one, every single prayer for a woman is most rewarded at home. She can come to the masjid. It's permissible for the woman to come to the masjid. The Prophet ﷺ permitted the woman to come to the masjid, assuming the proper circumstances exist. So the proper circumstances include a proper division between the males and the females, and proper separation in the sense that they know that that division remains intact. Alright? Some places there's a division, but then it never really remains intact. People are coming back and forth all the time. Other places there's no division. There has to be a proper division between the men and the women in the masjid. That's for sure. In fact, if you go back to the narrations concerning this matter, Aisha radiallahu anha says, blessed be, in Bukhari, in the book of Imam Bukhari, Aisha radiallahu anha says, blessed be the women of Medina. The day the ayah of hijab was revealed, every one of them came to the masjid in a veil. Okay? Now people like to argue, they like to say that at the time of the Prophet ﷺ there was no division between the men and the women. Right? There was no curtain separating the men and the women. There was no wall separating the men and the women, and they're absolutely right. There was no division separating the men and the women. But if Aisha radiallahu anha is telling us that every woman came in a veil, it means that there wasn't one curtain, there might have been 30 curtains. Right? If there was no ability to separate the men and the women with a wall or with a curtain or with some other matter, if the women came properly covered and they were wearing a veil or properly, completely covered, then that's like a separation. Whether you have one curtain or whether you have 30 curtains, what difference does it make? The point is that there was a separation between the males and the females. Then what happened was, over time, that separation became difficult to maintain that separation due to the numbers of people that were coming into the deen. So one day, Hazrat Umar radiallahu anh prohibited women from coming to the masjid. Now when he prohibited women from coming to the masjid, the women began to complain. They said, how can you do this? The Prophet ﷺ allowed us to come to the masjid. Who are you to prohibit us from coming to the masjid? So they went to Aisha radiallahu anha, because she was obviously the greatest scholar of this deen. She was the greatest scholar of the deen. She knew the deen from the inside and from the outside. She knew the habits of the Prophet ﷺ in the home, and she knew the things that occurred outside as well, because the Prophet ﷺ would tell her. So they went to Aisha radiallahu anha to complain and to say, how can Umar radiallahu anh do this? So Aisha radiallahu anha said that if the Prophet ﷺ was alive today, given the conditions, he would have prohibited the women from coming to the masjid the same way the women of Bani Israel were prohibited from coming to the masjid. That's her statement in the book of Imam Bukhari, by the way. So anyway, based on this, and based on the fact that the Sahaba did not have a question when Hazrat Umar radiallahu anh established this, at that point in Islamic law, women were prohibited from coming. The reason being is because the separation could not be properly maintained. Eventually, the scholars began ruling that depending on the circumstance and the situation, it's permissible by itself, fi nafsihi. The issue in and of itself is that it is permissible for a woman to come to the masjid, but the requirement is that proper separation exists. Alright? So anyway, for a woman, regardless of what the permissibility is, it still remains a fact, according to hadith, that the highest reward for her prayer is actually at home. So now basically the general principle for both men and women is that the maximum reward for the prayer exists at home. For a man, the only exception is fard. Everything else is highly rewarded at home. For a woman, every prayer is rewarded at home. The highest reward exists at home. So here, when Musa alayhi salam is telling his people that make your houses a qibla, in the same way the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam assigned us the exact same thing. Now, not only does this apply to prayer, but it applies to preparing for prayer as well. For example, the Prophet ﷺ, according to narrations, would wake up Aisha radiallahu anha in the middle of the night. When the Prophet ﷺ would wake up for tahajjud, he would also wake up his wife and he would wake her up for tahajjud as well. In another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ took it one step further. He actually made a dua. He said, may Allah have mercy upon that individual who wakes up, prays, and then wakes his wife. Right? And the opposite also applies. If a wife wakes up and prays, and then she wakes up her husband, the same dua applies. So here the Prophet ﷺ is not only granting a reward for praying at home, but he's making a dua for the people who establish the night prayer at home. So you get to come under the umbrella of the dua of the Prophet ﷺ. What better umbrella could there be? So that's actually the beauty of this particular issue. So that's the first thing that needs to occur at home. In everyone's home there needs to be prayer. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ likened the home with no prayer to a graveyard. Right? So we do not make our homes graveyards. What do we mean by that? In the graveyard it's prohibited to pray. No, you don't make salah in the graveyard. Right? When was the last time you saw people making salah in the graveyard? It's prohibited. So in the same way, we do not make our homes like graveyards, meaning we do not make our homes places where prayer would not be offered. So we need to regularly pray in the home to increase the barakah in the home. That's the first thing. Second thing is to use the home as a mechanism of dua. Now the Prophet ﷺ gave us two very simple dua that are related to the home, and both of them act as protection for the individual, whether they enter the home or leave the home. Basically there's two things that happen with your home every day. Every day you leave the home, and every day you enter the home. Sometimes you do it 4 times a day, sometimes you do it 10 times a day, sometimes you do it once a day. But every day you're going to leave the home and enter the home. And the Prophet ﷺ established the du'as for home based on leaving and entering. So in one narration, the Prophet ﷺ established that the individual who enters their home with Bismillah, with the name of Allah, as you enter the home you say Bismillah, that shaitan says to himself, you have no place here, so you should leave. Okay, now look at the way that shaitan is actually addressing himself. He says, oh, you have no place here, so you should leave. So the individual who enters their home with Bismillah, what they do is they remove the seat for shaitan. When they remove the seat for shaitan, they create a protected environment within their home. So that's entering the home. In the same way, the Prophet ﷺ said that the person who leaves the home, when they leave the home, they recite the following dua. Bismillah, the same, taking the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tawakkaltu ala Allah. I rely upon Allah. Wala hawla wala quwwata illa billah. And there is no power and there is no strength except with Allah. So actually 3 phrases. Bismillah, Tawakkaltu ala Allah, wala hawla wala quwwata illa billah. If this dua is recited as an individual leaves the home, then an announcement is made that this individual is protected and this individual is guided. Then shaitan is waiting at the door, because now you already threw him out of the house by saying Bismillah when you entered. Right? So he can't come in, now he's waiting by the door. As he's waiting by the door, when you leave the home and you recite this dua, shaitan says, what can I do if he's guided and he's protected? Right? So shaitan leaves that individual. Then another shaitan comes. And see what happens is then shaitan follows that individual around, hoping that that individual will make a mistake. Then another shaitan comes and says to the first shaitan, what are you going to do? This guy is guided and protected. And then they both leave. Okay? So the Prophet ﷺ actually tied in the protection of an individual with entering the home and with leaving the home. When we enter the home, we say Bismillah. When we leave the home, we say, Bismillah, tawakkaltu ala Allah, wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. So here again, here is a central principle of making dua around the home. Recognizing when we enter it that this is our fortress. And that when we leave it, we're leaving our fortress. And so we use a special type of protection, which is the dua assigned by the Prophet ﷺ. So this is the second type of dhikr that applies to the home. The third important aspect that should occur within the home is recitation of the Quran. Every single home should have recitation of the Holy Quran within it. Now that applies in general and particularly. In general, we should constantly be reciting the Quran in the home. When we recite Quran in the home, what happens is that it draws in the barakah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember one thing about the Quran, it is a magnet of the mercy of Allah. Wherever it's recited, Allah's barakah descends. And nur descends. And the angels descend. Any place the Quran is recited, because it's the word of Allah. It is superior to any other word that a human can ever recite with their tongue. So when an individual takes that Quran and recites it in their home, whether it be in prayer, whether it be from the mushaf, whether it be through memorization or teaching and learning, when that occurs, what ends up happening is they attract Allah's mercy. They attract barakah, they attract Allah's rahmah, that increases the love within the home, it dissipates animosity within the home, and it creates within the home a special type of peace. In fact, when you go into people's homes who recite a lot of Quran, or when you go into a place where a lot of Quran is recited, you sit down and you say, SubhanAllah, I feel a weird peace here. I feel some kind of unique peace here. Actually, what you're feeling, what happens in that instance is that your body or your soul begins to experience a coolness and a pleasure that it had experienced previously. Meaning, when you were first created, you were created in the presence of Allah. Right? There was a day called Yawm al-Alast, when we stood before Allah and Allah said, Alastu bi Rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And we said, Bala. Now on that day we were in the presence of Allah. We were in this particular garden being asked this question. Now that garden had the nur of Allah, the barakah of Allah, the special odor that exists within Jannah, etc. All of that was present there. So when you are back in this earth, what happens is you begin to remember that original abode when you are in places where that environment exists. For example, when you smell a very nice itar, or if you smell a very nice scent, it is very pleasing to the soul. You never trained your soul to like that or to dislike it. It's naturally pleasing. The reason why it's naturally pleasing is because your nafs actually experienced it before. Your soul actually experienced before. So when you are actually placed in that environment again, you begin to remember that, and that reminds your soul of that previous abode. So that's why a good scent is something that attracts the soul. Similarly, nur attracts the soul. Open spaces, anytime you go into a place with a lot of open space, you feel very attracted, because you're used to that from that day. Your soul had already experienced that, so it's reminded of that abode. Anyway, with the recitation of the Quran, then you begin to create that environment within your home. One, that benefits you, because then it creates love between you and your wife. It creates love between you and your children. Your children become nourished on that type of environment, and that's what provides them the benefit. Then what happens? When a child gets used to that kind of environment, when they leave the home, they will always re-seek that environment. It becomes like a fish out of water. If you raise your child in that type of environment, when they leave that environment, they are like a fish out of water. They don't feel comfortable. They feel that something's wrong. And so that actually is an excellent way to train our children, is to just create that environment. You don't have to do very much more. Then what will happen is every time that environment arises, they will naturally be attracted to it. So anyway, that's the importance of the general recitation of the Holy Quran. Then the Prophet ﷺ established some particular things that should be recited. And the most emphasized thing to recite within the home is Surah Al-Baqarah. The most emphasized thing to recite in the home, as far as the Quran is concerned, is Surah Al-Baqarah. In two narrations, the Prophet ﷺ highlighted the benefits of Al-Baqarah within the home. Number one, the Prophet ﷺ said that home in which Surah Al-Baqarah is recited, shaitan flees from it. If shaitan flees from it, then all the maliciousness of shaitan flees from it, and then all of the barakah of the nur of Allah, the blessings of Allah, etc. come into the relationships within the home. So one, if Surah Al-Baqarah is recited in a home, shaitan flees from it. And then in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that if Surah Al-Baqarah is recited in a home, shaitan cannot enter it. So look at the comprehensiveness of Surah Al-Baqarah. Number one, it eliminates the shaitan from the home. Number two, it blocks shaitan from entering the home. It's the perfect cure. So for us, Surah Al-Baqarah is essential within the home. In fact, when I was in Damascus, my wife was studying with a group of women. There was not a day that passed except that they would read Surah Al-Baqarah within the home. It used to amaze me that how can these women every single day recite these 250 plus ayat every single day without fail? They were so particular about this, but when you went in their homes, you felt there was something special in their home. You felt that nur, you felt that, you could notice it. Even in a place so blessed as Sham, right, which already itself is a blessed place, when you would walk into their homes, you would feel like you had been hit with something. So it's very important that you recite Surah Al-Baqarah within home. Now, this you'll find in general applies even when you buy a new home, or when you rent a home and you move into that home, alright? So try to recite Surah Al-Baqarah even before you move into that home to eliminate shaitan and all of his henchmen from even being in that place. Now, it's true that sometimes it becomes difficult to recite the whole surah, and the Prophet ﷺ was the first to recognize this. So you'll see that often the Prophet ﷺ assigns us a huge task, and then later on gives us an escape by giving us just a very, very short amount of that task to give the same benefit. Many places in this deen, the Prophet ﷺ knocked down the requirements, but gave the same benefit. Beginning with prayer, where it was supposed to be 50, and it got knocked down to 5, and including this particular issue as well. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ said, in a very beautiful hadith, it's a very lengthy, detailed hadith about Surah Al-Baqarah and the verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, but in one particular hadith he said, that if in a home, the last 2 ayat of Surah Al-Baqarah are recited, and they're recited for 3 consecutive nights, then shaitan cannot approach that home. Now look at the simplicity by which the Prophet ﷺ has attracted us. First, he assigned us to recite the entire Surah Al-Baqarah. For some of us, it would take the whole day, and we still wouldn't complete it. But then the Prophet ﷺ knocked the task down a bit by saying that the individual who recites the last 2 verses of Surah Al-Baqarah and recites them for 3 consecutive nights, after that, shaitan will not be able to approach the home. So if the least amount that you should do within the home, the very, very least amount, if you cannot recite the entire surah, is to recite the very last 2 ayat before you go to sleep. Recite the last 2 ayat, and then inshallah the entire home will be purged. Now some people, they'll say, well, I don't have a home. My parents own the home, I have a room. Well, that's your home. That room is your home. So in your room, you should establish your Islam, right? You should be able to read Quran in there, pray your prayers in there, read these 2 last ayat of Surah Al-Baqarah in there. So these are the things that the Prophet ﷺ encouraged within the home. Now the 4th thing, which we're not going to talk about now, we'll talk about next week, that the Prophet ﷺ encouraged within the home is gaining knowledge. Okay? Unfortunately, we reverse the paradigm. We always say, if you want to gain knowledge, where should I go? We're always leaving the home to gain knowledge, but the Prophet ﷺ established the home as the center, as the cradle of knowledge, you can say. So there should be a very, very diligent effort to establish learning and teaching within the home. And so inshallah we'll cover that next week. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to make our homes places where there is life and nur, to establish prayer within the home, to recite the du'as that are appropriate for the home, and to engage ourselves in the recitation of the Quran within our homes. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.